I am Sarah Kamau. I am the chair of the Commonwealth Disabled People Forum, and I come from Kenya in East Africa and represent the United Disabled Persons of Kenya, where we are a national umbrella of organizations of disabled people, covering over 300 organizations who are led and controlled by disabled people with different focus and interests, such as local organizations, disabled women and youth networks, and organizations that focus on specific impairments, such as being blind, albinism, and deaf. We have found by uniting and listening to each other, we have much more chance of influencing national government to improve things for disabled people across Kenya. I would like to welcome you to this second module of our course aimed at developing disabled youth leaders around the Commonwealth. Our theme today and for this month is Organizing for Disability Equality and the Struggle for Equality. I'll talk a bit about the language that we use in the Commonwealth People's Forum and why we call ourselves disabled people. While we still choose to call ourselves disabled people in the Commonwealth Disabled People Forum, is because of the development of the social model of disability. In the 19th and 20th century, a disabled person medical condition was thought to be the root cause of their exclusion from society, an approach now referred to as medical or individual model of disability. We use the social model of disability where impairments and lead to prejudices and discrimination. So to call ourselves persons with disabilities is to accept that we are objects and powerless. We view ourselves as united by a common oppression, so are proud to identify as disabled people rather than people with disabilities. When we are talking about the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, we will refer to persons with disabilities. Last month, we focused on the paradigm shift. As you know, this means the transition away from negative, cultural-based ideas and attitudes based on trying to explain impairment as punishment. The impact of evil spirits of gods is expressed by prejudicial stigma and attitudes. Secondly, charity ideas based on pity and providing refuge and asylum to those with impairments, outcast or ostracized by society. And thirdly, medical model ideas that focus mainly on our impairments and healing us. The problem is often medical science has no answers, and this approach puts the focus on how we are different from normal. Of course, we need medical support, but we do not want to be seen through that lens, which often leads our isolation and separation. Let me define the word impairment, which means long-term or permanent loss of physical, sensory, psychosocial, or mental function is part of the human condition. The issue is how it is responded to. Instead, we promote the social model of thinking that empowers us as disabled people to change the barriers in society, in the environment, in the organization, in communication and attitudes, and find solutions that lead to our equal treatment. This social model thinking has been the powerhouse of transforming our lives, and we have to do it together. It also leads us to understanding we are the experts on what is needed to include us, which is why we say nothing about us without us, and even nothing without us. Based on this understanding, disabled people and our organizations campaigned and won at a global level at the United Nations human rights to be explicitly extended to all disabled people. This was finally achieved in the United Nations Convention of Persons with Disabilities in 2006. So the social model or the human rights approach holds out the promise of real change to full equality for disabled people around the world. we could say this is our dream, but how do we translate it to reality? I want to bring the situation of the Kenyan examples of how we have been able to struggle in this equality struggle and inclusion and equality of disability to be at the same level with others in the society. We have organized ourselves in the grassroots level where we have used the government structures that are there, and they have been able to help us to access services and goods from the government as well as other providers. The government administrative structures include first the individuals or caregivers who we normally use to come up together and form groups so that they can be able to be supported by the government, because government hardly reaches to an individual but comes in for groups. We also have the household levels where now they go out and we go out and reach out to the households, as well as where we look at the elders of those households who are called nyumba kumi. In Kenya, they call them nyumba kumi. And those are the people we kind of engage and use as organizing our way of fighting for this inclusion. We have the village levels where we have village elders or village heads who are also helpful in helping us to get the people on board who would like supported. We have then the sub-county led by sub-chiefs, which have the chiefs themselves, and then we have the ward levels. And this is the point where we have the county assemblies, and we have members of county assemblies who represent issues of persons with disabilities in the legislature in the county assemblies. And in these county assemblies, we have ward education, bursaries, and we have ward development funds where the representatives of persons with disabilities within them are able to push for the disability inclusion agenda and disability equality rights. There is also in the ward level, the ward administrators, who are people we engage also as they are concerned with the public participation on the things that the counties want to put on board. And from time to time, then they engage the organizations of disabled people in the counties to bring out the county integrated development plans, which are disability inclusive, as well as to have county budgets and county economic forums where issues of persons with disabilities are also on board. So we have the county, sub-county levels after that are accompanied by several issues and several levels of administration. And then after the sub-county level, we have the national level where, as United Disabled Persons of Kenya, we are able to influence government on policy, bring together organizations of persons with disabilities, which bring their policy issues on board, which we do memorandums and forward them over to the government for inclusion. And we have in different forums like the Disability Inclusion Coordinating Committee on the political space. We have the data disaggregation where we engage with the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, among other places. And this is the way we have been able to get more done for persons with disabilities in our country. Thank you. I would like to welcome our General Secretary, Richard Razor, to take over the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And it's really interesting to hear of the sort of detailed structure you've got in Kenya, because I think all about making change today, change happens every day. Really, our issue is how we make progress and influence those with power to make change for the good for the disabled people around the Commonwealth. From small beginnings, any organization can grow, learning from the experience of its members, listening to everyone's ideas and views, profiting from the energy and commitment of new members. Each generation will need to overhaul and build these organizations until all our objectives have been achieved. And I have to say, we are on a good track, but we are far from having achieved our objectives, which would be the implementation, the full implementation of the UNCRPD, and full equality for disabled people. We're a long, long way from that. So we still need to build these organizations. As the world around us changes, some problems are solved, and I'm afraid new ones develop. We will need to find new approaches to new problems and new challenges. Change is not always for the better, but it is always stimulating. Vigilance keeps us alert and active. Without it, we cannot assume that everything is for the good, because there are all sorts of forces in the world that don't necessarily see us and our welfare and our rights as a priority. And now we've heard from Kenya, now let's go to the other side of Africa. We're going to hear from Rita Kusi of the Ghana Federation of Disabled Organizations. I think she's the CEO, and they have a very interesting organization there that she's going to tell us about.
My name is Rita Kusi Trema, the Executive Director of Ghana Federation of Disability Organizations. The Ghana Federation of Disability Organizations has existed over 35 years. It was set up in 1987. Currently, we are 12 national organizations of persons with disabilities. The organization was set up by 3 member organizations, or 3 disabled people organizations, to mainly champion or advocate on issues that are of common interest to them. At the time, it was Ghana Blind Union, Ghana Society of the Physically Disabled, and Ghana National Association of the Deaf. They came together to form the federation, and over the years, the membership has grown, currently with 12 members, and we keep growing and hoping that we'll be able to strengthen ourselves for our advocacy. Over the years of existence, we have advocated on major issues that are promoting human rights of persons with disabilities in Ghana, issues that concern inclusion, participation, and representation in the Ghanaian society. Notably, we have advocated for the adoption of the Persons with Disability Act 715, which was done in 2006. This was an intensive advocacy that was led by organizations of persons with disabilities under the coordination of the Ghana Federation of Disability Organizations. Of course, we acknowledge the contribution of partners. We also advocated for the inclusion of disability in Ghana's electoral process. So in the presidential and parliamentary electoral processes, we advocated to ensure that the policies, the messages of political parties, and awareness programs of the Electoral Commission, as well as the voting materials and the environment, are all accessible to persons with disabilities. It is important to note that we have advocated for Ghana government to adopt a policy that provides more financial resources from the central government to the local level, and particularly I'm referring to the District Assembly's Common Fund, which is part of Ghana's decentralization process. The Federation actually has branches in all the districts in Ghana, about 260 districts now. We are in all the 16 regions of Ghana, and we are happy to say that this policy is supporting persons with disabilities in the communities to ensure that they have resources for their own empowerment and inclusion activities. We advocated for disability inclusion in our national development plan, and for over 10 years we have consistently advocated for disability inclusion in the national development plan, which is a plan that guides Ghana's development agenda. And we are happy that the Federation and its member organizations and other organizations working in the disability sector have worked together on this, and we are happy to say that we led this process from the civil society perspective. We have been organizing ourselves. Actually, we have our governance structure at the national level, and in the regions we have our structures. Where we have two or more member organizations, you will find the federation represented in those districts. At the regional level, we have all our branches set up and working to ensure that we strengthen them at the regional and district levels. Our member organizations also have branches in the regions and in the districts. We work to ensure that there is better participation, there is better inclusion and contribution by our member organizations and our local branches. And so we, in our working and in our advocacy work, we use both bottom-up and top-down approaches to ensure that everyone's voice is heard. We are putting in extra efforts to ensure that minority groups of persons with disabilities are not left out in the national conversation. And so in our efforts, we are working with individuals with deaf blindness, we're working with persons with leprosy, and then we're working with stroke survivors. There are other groups we have identified, and we're working to empower them so that they can have the voice that is needed for their inclusion, so that they are not left out of the conversations. Our big achievements, I mentioned some of them, but I am happy to again highlight that we worked with our members to ensure that Ghana adopted the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and also monitoring and supporting the implementation to ensure that the government of Ghana effectively implements the convention so that it benefits persons with disabilities as expected. Currently, we are working to ensure that the National Disability Act, which is deemed inconsistent with the convention, is reviewed so that it can adequately provide for the rights of persons with disabilities. For this whole period, we have learned a lot. Importantly, we have learned that disability inclusion and advocacy requires a lot of hands. It does not take only us as DPOs or as organizations of persons with disabilities. It is important to recognize other voices that could empower us. And so we've worked with other civil society organizations and other international organizations to ensure that we add our voices together to influence. Again, it is important to acknowledge that no matter how little the voices are, no matter how little the voices of persons with disabilities are, it is important to let it heard. We need to mobilize to always ensure that everyone is on the table, and that is why we have initiated actions and efforts to ensure that groups that are left out of the conversation around the table are brought on board. Currently, our major advocacy work is on the review of the Disability Act. We are advocating so that government reviews the Disability Act to conform with the convention or to be consistent with the provisions of the convention. The National Disability Act in its current state has some major gaps, and we believe that the adoption of the convention by our government provides or creates a bigger opportunity for us to work together to review the act. And so as advocates, as organizations of persons with disabilities, we're working for the review to happen. Apart from this, we also working to ensure that Ghana adopts an employment equity policy, which will ensure that there are opportunities set for persons with disabilities to access jobs and to participate in society and live independent lives as expected and as required by our laws. And so these are the major issues we're working on. In addition, we are monitoring the implementation of Ghana's commitment made at the Global Disability Summit. The government of Ghana hosted the summit with the government of Norway in 2022. And we're happy to say that organizations of persons with disabilities in Ghana and the Federation contributed to the process of getting government to make more critical commitments. And we are monitoring the process of implementation of the commitment. Currently, we have worked with government to adopt a roadmap for implementation of the commitments, and it's being rolled out in the districts and in the regions. And our contribution is to ensure that it is adopted, it's effectively implemented by government. Thank you.
So very interesting what Rita had to say, and she showed a blueprint really of how going right down at the local level up to national and how they have actually moved this. So we've had two good examples already from Africa of building from the very local up to the national. Let's have a look at the phases we go through to build our independent organizations that are unified and diverse. And it's really important that we are independent. Lots of countries have now set up councils which are controlled of disabled people or people with disabilities, who they pick who is on that council. That isn't independent. We have to have an independent voice, which is our own voice as DPOs, which is democratically arrived at positions and elected representatives. We will look at a diversity in November in much more detail, looking at gender, age, type of impairment, representation across the country. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on that today. And in January, we're going to look at how we must maintain democracy in our organizations. But today we're going to look at building the organizations and some of the things we can achieve. So progress in building the movement from isolation through solidarity and struggle. Social and political change and influence. Let's have a look at that, because influence is the key. Society won't change on its own. It'll only change when large sections of society want change, and that's in democratic countries. In autocratic countries, even if everybody wants change, it doesn't actually happen. And that's why the Commonwealth is committed to democratic structures and gives us a start to actually build our organizations. We know best what our needs are, and our contribution to the process of change will make it more effective. Social change happens in two ways: through changes in attitudes and behaviors of individuals and groups, and through changes in law, policies, practices, and services. We have to work to do both of those things. To change attitudes and behavior, people need to know about us, our needs, and what we have to offer. In the first program, we really found out how lots of disabled people are locked away, segregated, isolated by their families, by society, and so on. We have to break that down and tell people about it, and also show that we are human beings too. We're human beings first, and our society and our world will need to change as a result. To change society's formal structures, we need to make sure that law and policy makers, as well as service providers, know not only about our needs, but also our ideas for solving problems. The framework of the UNCRPD, the UN Convention, helps us with this now, ratified by all but 2 Commonwealth countries. Only Tonga and Cameroon of the 58 have not ratified it, which means that all the other 56 countries have to be actively engaged with disabled people and their organizations in making continuous change to their society. We find that that isn't happening, that people sign these conventions and then just leave it. That cannot be, which is why we need active organizations. So first of all, awareness, mind changing minds. Everybody is different, and difference can be frightening. So we have to make the unusual and the frightening less frightening and normal almost. We have to value each other, but also value difference. When you tell someone about yourself, about your daily life, your thoughts and feelings, you make it easier for them to understand you. As individuals, disabled people can tell the community about their needs and what they have to offer. This is particularly true in rural areas where disabled children are hidden away in the home. There, things like community-based rehabilitation, going door to door and talking to parents, led by disabled people and community workers, to show that their child, however they may perceive them, could be valuable in society and gain by going to school, nursery, and on to employment. We can also use the internet and social media, local radio and newspapers. But remember, meeting face-to-face is the most powerful way to change things. It's much more powerful than social media. And though it may be easier to become an opinion former and have your own views, they are just your own views. We need democratic views that are arrived at by large numbers of people. And yes, we can use the internet to get those views, but we also need to sit and be with each other to learn each other's access needs and how we can actually meet them. As an organization, the first step towards change is getting together with other disabled people. If you aren't a member of an organization already, find out about local groups. If no organization exists where you are, why not start one? Decide on your aims and get to know each other. It's important to actually do this. And the next stage is to tell the world about what you and your members want, to make an issue widely known. You can write letters, send out press releases to the newspaper, put up posters, hold public meetings, encourage members to talk to relatives, hold occupations, sit-ins, protests. If, for instance, the local bus is not accessible, if a public building is not accessible, these things are meant to be changed. It's very important to show that your organization is achieving something, providing a service, generating income for members, encouraging access improvements. Have a newsletter, let people know what you have achieved. Having an effect on laws and policies is sometimes the best way to affect laws, policies and services is by the kind of public awareness we've just described. But sometimes that on its own won't work. Change in law is very important because even if you persuade the head teacher at the local school or the boss of a big company to support educational employment for local disabled people, that teacher or that boss may change jobs. If it isn't in law, it isn't there. For instance, some people have had to take a lot of action. One of our previous vice chairs in Trinidad spent 120 days in a demonstration and hunger strike outside the Parliament building before they would actually pass a law. In India, there were a number of people who went on hunger strike to get laws passed, the 2016 Act, which it took a long time to get. We want improvements to be permanent and enforceable, not temporary and based on sympathetic individuals. We don't want charity, we want rights. Develop a unified voice is important. Otherwise, divide and rule tactics can be used by those who do not want that change. Now, I'm going to now show a clip from Steve Esty, who I'm afraid died last month. For many years, a leading advocate in the disability movement, right back to the 1970s, where he talks in his little interview about all 10 provinces within Canada when the split from Rehabilitation Conference, which we talked about in the last program, took place in 1980. Leading members from Canada were there. And really, it would be true to say, without the support of the Canadians, we wouldn't have actually established disability DPI the following year. And that wouldn't have happened. So it's very important. So let's hear Steve.
Hi, my name is Steve Esty. I'm from Canada. I live in a city on the Atlantic Ocean called Halifax. And I'm really happy to be here to talk a little bit about DPOs in Canada. I've worked for many years, 25 years, I suppose, with disabled people's organizations here in Canada and around the world. The national peak organization, or cross-disability organization in Canada, is called the Council of Canadians with Disabilities. And I was for many years the volunteer chair of the International Committee of the Council of Canadians with Disabilities, or CCD. CCD is an organization that was founded in the 1970s. And it was founded at that time because disabled people didn't have a voice of their own in any way at all. There were charitable organizations, a Rotary Club, March of Dimes, Jerry Lewis Telethon down south in the United States, all of that kind of thing. And a few disabled people realized that we needed to have a voice to speak for ourselves. So we founded what was called at the beginning, the Coalition of Organizations, the Coalition of Provincial Organizations of the Handicapped, which was the nomenclature of the day. And COPO, Coalition of Provincial Organizations of the Handicapped, founded in, I think, 1975, brought together cross-disability organizations from all 10 Canadian provinces. Because there were grassroots organizations that were founded in all of our provinces, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And these cross-disability organizations were working to give disabled people a voice at the provincial and local level. And they decided that they needed to organize at a national level to give us a national voice. So that we did in 1975. And we've worked together as a national disability organization since that time. And we've achieved many, many things. We've also had many, many frustrations, just like every other organization. But in terms of the things that we've achieved, I think that really probably the key thing in the beginning was in 1982, when we repatriated our constitution from the British. Previous to that, there was no Canadian constitution. There was the British North America Act. And I'm sure that many other Commonwealth countries have similar experience. But in 1982, our Prime Minister of the day, Pierre Trudeau, decided to bring the constitution home. And as part of that, he enacted a thing called the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which enshrines human rights in our Constitution. And there was a huge, huge effort at that time to ensure that disability was made reference to in the Constitution, and that the rights and freedoms of people with disabilities were guaranteed in the same way they were for Indigenous people or for women or for people who were LGBT or whatever. There was a lot of resistance to this at the time. Those of us who are old enough to remember would realize and recognize that there wasn't really much of an understanding of disability as a human rights issue at the time. But we were successful, and that was the key, the beginning of the disability rights movement here in Canada in 1982.
Okay, so thank you, Steve, and we will miss you and all your thoughts and ideas and your experience. Our movement changes, which is why we need you young people to step up to the plate now and take on the leadership role, because we all have limited time on this earth. So some lessons we've learned from our last 50 years of struggle about how we actually build these organizations. Stage one, disabled people are often isolated from each other and the world, locked in institutions, segregated by inaccessible housing, hidden away by families who are ashamed and frightened of them. They have no money, no power, often no way of moving about or communicating with each other. We have to build from that raw material. Sometimes it's small stages, small steps, which bring about confidence in those people so that we can move forward. Secondly, sometimes as a result of being managed in groups by medical and rehabilitation professionals, and sometimes due to families of disabled people forming organizations, groups of people with similar impairments begin to come together. So that can be just a group of parents who want their children to go to the local school, and the head teachers in the local area say, no, we can't cope with them. Well, the law says in all but 2 of our Commonwealth countries that they have to go to the local school if that's what parents want. And so you start a campaign. You start by convincing teachers, you show them some of the techniques that they can use. You are experts in reaching and meeting the needs of your children, and you build the campaign. Stage 3, disabled people with different impairments realize how some of their experiences are similar. It doesn't matter if you're deaf or blind or in a wheelchair or neurodiverse or have a learning difficulty, it doesn't matter, because people look at you all in the same way as other. You are not part of us. You're something different. As a result, many disabled people realize that their problems are not just because of their individual impairment, but because of non-disabled people's fear and superstition, and the fact that society itself has been organized as if disabled people didn't exist. So now we will hear from Samoa and Matafa Fatino Utapamoapu, who is the manager of the national umbrella organization there, Nunanu Ulo Alufa. And this is really important because in 12 months' time, the whole of the Commonwealth will be coming to Samoa for the next heads of Commonwealth meeting. So it's going to be very important. So let's hear from Tino.
Good morning. I'm Matafa Fatino Tumapu, the General Manager for Nonua Lelofa, the National Advocacy Organization of Persons with Disabilities, established in 2001 with a vision of an inclusive and barrier-free Samoa for all persons with disabilities.
Your first question is, please tell us about the issues you faced organizing disabled people in the small islands countries of the Pacific.
Well, I will not speak for all Pacific countries, but in the case of Samoa, the perception of the community towards persons with disabilities is indeed one of the barriers. Persons with disabilities were perceived back in the days as sick people, or a result of a curse, or a result of a crime that was committed by any of the parents. Because of this, persons with disabilities found it very difficult to come out. Secondly, the capacity of individuals with disabilities to take on various roles within organizations due to the limited education and all the other barriers. Thirdly, Samoa does not have a public transport system that is accessible. This made it difficult for persons with physical disabilities, for instance, to move around, let alone to come and join organizations' activities.
Your second question is, what were the best ways you found of organizing disabled people?
Well, first of all, the commitment and dedication of persons with disabilities to come together and advocate for themselves was one of the ways. Secondly, the recognition of that commitment by the various communities. Thirdly, finding champions at all levels, both within the OPD itself and the community at large, to advocate for the issues that are important for persons with disabilities. Thirdly, the establishment of frameworks in which they guide the work of persons with disabilities and their organizations. For instance, the International Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities has been a very crucial framework to support the work of organizations of persons with disabilities and in advocating for the issues that are important to them.
Your last question is, what are the current key issues for disabled people in Pacific Islands, and what are the solutions you are struggling for?
Well, despite of the fact that we live in different Pacific Islands, our struggles are the same in terms of the fact that the work of organizations of persons with disabilities are often under-resourced. This means that we are limiting capacities to undertake different roles because of the fact that we do not have sufficient resources. We continue to advocate on the ratification and implementation of the International Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which is the core framework to our work. And our voices are often not heard in developments, despite that some developments are written well in paper. The actions are not translated into meaningful results for us. So in terms of the results that we're struggling for, we as Pacific Islands call on our governments to ensure that adequate resources are invested towards strengthening the capacity and development of organizations of persons with disabilities, ratify and implement the International Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and create opportunities for persons with disabilities to engage in and advocate for their rights and their voices to be heard. Lastly but not the least, ensure that we are consulted in any developments impacting on our lives. Nothing about us without us.
So thank you, Tino. And it shows that even where you have a country made up of lots of small islands, such as Samoa in the South Pacific, where there's a will, there's a way, and they have organized and made big differences there and will continue to do so. And incidentally, all of the 9 Commonwealth countries in the Pacific, which are made up of some 4,000 islands, have the national DPO umbrella organizations and have managed to get ratification of the convention apart from Tonga. So that is a big achievement. So stage 4, the single impairment and the issue organizations join together to campaign to change attitudes, law, policies, and services. So this might bring in the blind organization, the deaf organization, the parents organization for children with learning difficulties, the mental health survivors, the people with a specific thing like amputees, veterans who are injured by war, all sorts of different groups realize that they need to form a common alliance, because together, like a bunch of twigs, they are much less easy to be broken. A twig on its own can be broken, a bunch of twigs really difficult. So solidarity and mutual support is important. And in order for that to be accepted and be fair, there needs to be a democratic way of all people feel support each other. Learning this is really important, because we then present that to national policy makers. So another example, quite quickly, in 2010 in Guyana, Ganesh Singh, who's on our executive for the Caribbean region, is going to tell us about how the Guyana Council of Organizations for Persons with Disability was formed in 2010 and the achievements that they have actually got.
The Guyana Council of Organizations for Persons with Disabilities was organized back in 2008 and officially registered in early 2010. The group was started by a few persons with disabilities who were prominent in disability advocacy at that time in Guyana and saw the need for the establishment of an umbrella organization to promote the rights of persons with disabilities at the national level. So those individuals got together, and so with support from the National Commission on Disability, and at that time Voluntary Services Overseas, they worked to start the Guyana Council as a committee, and then it was officially launched in early 2010. The main objective of the group is to work at the national level to promote the rights of persons with disabilities and to advocate for a more inclusive Guyana, while developing the capacity or building the capacity of persons with disabilities across the country. When the group started, one of the main goals was to ensure that the Guyana Persons with Disabilities Act is passed, or the bill, the Guyana Persons with Disabilities Bill, is passed in Parliament, and that was achieved on November 2nd. Actually, it was achieved in early 2010 and signed into law on November 2nd of the same year. So that was a major accomplishment of the group in its early days. Over the years, the organization would have had tremendous success in lobbying various government officials and agencies to ensure that policies and different programs are implemented to benefit persons with disabilities. The Guyana Council has been at the forefront of promoting the whole transformation of the disability landscape. You know, one can say when you speak of disability, you hear about the Guyana Council of Organisation of Persons with Disabilities in Guyana. We partner with various United Nations agencies that work here, the U.S. Embassy, USAID, ExxonMobil, Guyana, the various government ministries, and a number of other partners to ensure that projects and programs are implemented for the benefit of persons with disabilities. There are numerous challenges as an organization. Funding is one. There is no primary source for funding for the organization. All the funding comes through project, hence the human resource capacity or human resources are limited because of the lack of funding. However, we would have been able to manage over the years with hard work from the staff, volunteers, and other individuals that are associated with the group. You know, we've been able to mitigate the impact of some of those challenges. Additionally, the attitudes of some policymakers towards disability rights, you know, that always plays negatively when it comes to our work. But you know, again, we try to diplomatically and strategically maneuver, you know, the attitudes of those individuals. So, again, the Guyana Council, as an organization, we are at the forefront of disability advocacy on the civil society side. And you know, I really do encourage persons out there. It is best to organize and have numbers. We are made up of 24 different disabled people organizations across the country. So when we speak from a position of authority because we represent the masses. And that is what more persons need to do in different countries, is to organize at a national level and to have as many voices represented. We, you know, our groups represent all types of disability in Guyana. So when we speak of for all persons with disabilities. Thank you.
And then the next stage, stage 5, change can come quite rapidly once you've got these other things in place, once you've got these alliances across the community. The community is more aware of disabled people, see them on the streets, at work, on television. Programs and policies change and legislation is passed in some countries. Sometimes it will still require a great big push. And now we'll hear from another part of the world, from South Asia. We're going to hear from Abia Akram, who's a leading advocate for disabled women, but is also on our executive for South Asia. And she's from Pakistan Special Talent Exchange Program, STEP, and she'll tell us about what happened in Pakistan.
It took us 2 decades to reach on the point where we have actually engaged the organizations of persons with disability to take the decisions, to sit on the table, to talk about their challenges, and highlighted the importance of the legislation in Pakistan. We were really struggling to address that how long these persons with disabilities will be systematically excluded from the systems. The policies were quiet on the disability rights. The organizations of the development sector, the government, state, they were not providing the services which was needed for persons with disability. If we talk about education, the data was completely silent. How many children with disabilities are going to school? If we talk about women and girls with disability, we were not aware how many of them were facing gender-based violence, sexual harassment at workplace and their daily lives. And we also seen that during the floods, during the conflicted areas, they were the first who were left behind. They were the first who were not getting access to the basic services. We came up with a strategy that we have to include persons with disabilities. We mobilized them, trained them. We took them to different exchange programs where we learned about the disability rights. We took some parliamentarians along with the Organization of Persons with Disability to understand the laws and the importance of the legislations. We ran a campaign that was kind of an advocacy campaign with the organizations of persons with disabilities. STEP was playing a very important and the key role to talk about the legislation. We referenced that like we were having only one legislation that was in 1980s. It was only about the rehabilitation or the quota system. But in 2020, we actually got the first ever disability rights legislation that got enactment. We have all the provinces who have accepted the disability legislation, and in that legislation we have seen the human rights perspective was addressed. It's not about the charity, it's not about the medical thing only, but you have to be in the overall systems to change, systems to incorporate. We talked with the Ministry of Human Rights. They have established the first ever Council on the Rights of Persons with Disability, and they have included persons with disability organizations. So that was a huge success. We also working as an advisory role to the National Commission on the Status of Women. We were part of many advisory boards. We established the special committee within the Parliament House. We referenced that policies with the Sustainable Development Goals, with the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, and all the key documents. And we also talking about the implementation need teeth to bite. If you don't have the teeth, then the policies will be a document, and we need that practical implementation. And it's again the role of the organizations of persons with disability to take the leadership, to take the ownership, and how we mobilize them at all levels, from the very grassroots level to the national and the global level, to share their experiences, their challenges, and they bring the change. And I feel like it's important for the young people with disabilities, because we are from the Commonwealth, we are from the developing countries, from the global south. We've seen that challenges, and it's only possible if the young people can take the lead. And like STEP, like many other organizations, they also contribute jointly on the regional level and at the same time on the grassroots and the national level. Thank you.
Stage 6, despite positive change, there are still problems and new dangers. There are always new dangers. A war starts. So suddenly in Ukraine, for instance, they've got huge numbers of people who've lost limbs from landmines and from shelling. Some were over 60,000 new disabled people, who are all young people who were soldiers. And this happens in every war. War is a great creator of impairment, and creating impairment is the society ready to remove the barriers so those people can have an equal life? And usually they're not. Another thing is genetic engineering. We've seen a big increase since the Genome Project in the way that we can actually manipulate the genes or chromosomes which shape us. And new ideas are being put forward all the time, which aren't exactly Nazi ideas of purifying the race, but they do come down to actually eugenicist ideas of getting rid of disabled babies, fetuses, letting disabled babies die, euthanasia for severely disabled people. These ideas keep coming back, and we need to be vigilant to maintain campaigns, because we have human rights, and those human rights are indivisible, and all human beings have equal rights. So there cannot be these sorts of geneticist approaches which are brought in by medical people or right-wing politicians. Then we go on to the 7th and formal stage, which we can't read a crystal ball of, which is the future. And the future, we don't know. We don't, but we have to be ready. We have to be ready for what will happen in the future. So the worldwide disability movement grows in its strength, but it goes up and down, because a lot of people think, oh, we've got that legislation now. Now we can relax. Now we can stop. Now we don't have to do it anymore. But you know what? There are so many pieces of legislation and so many demands on government's time. If we don't maintain our organization and keep putting forward new demands, then many of the things that we thought we'd got rid of will creep right back in. And that's one of the reasons why, what is our big campaign as the CDPF this year? Well, it's to get the heads of government, the 56 states who are going to Samoa next October, the week of the 21st. They're all going to Samoa, And we are campaigning throughout this year, and you may be able to help with this if you have links with local politicians, to get them to get their government to agree to sign a Commonwealth protocol for the inclusion of disabled people. And that needs to go through for every country because it's by agreement. So the more work we can do on that, the more we're likely to achieve that. So that's one way we're trying to change things for the population of the Commonwealth, which is 2/5 of the world's population with 450 million disabled people. That's something you can get involved in by writing letters and so on.
Hello everyone, this is Patience Ogolo-Dixon from Nigeria. I'm just going to share about the Nigeria experience around the importance of building up a movement towards achieving or on the realization of disability law. In Nigeria, after the UNCRPD ratified and the optional protocol, it took 12 years of relentless advocacy work for Nigeria to finally get a Disability Act in place. During those 12 years, the Disability Bill, as it was called then, failed to receive presidential assent in 3 consecutive times. It took the relentless efforts of all DPOs, inclusion experts, and related stakeholders to build upon a collective movement. And in solidarity, we were all able to actually engage the government and advocate together. And at the end, we now have the Discrimination Against Persons with Disability Prohibition Act that came into existence in January 2019. The law prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability and imposes sanctions, including fines and prison sentences on those who contravene it. It also gave us a National Commission for Persons with Disability responsible for ensuring that persons with disability have access to housing, education, healthcare, and other areas of interest. It wouldn't have been possible if not for the movements that came to be, building upon this collective approach to ensure that we had a national framework, a national document that will project and promote issues of persons with disability in Nigeria. We are hoping that this bill will also experience the same trend in implementation, because that implementing this bill is it's already a challenge, and we are hoping that this will be a thing of the past. When we work together, we achieve more together. Thank you.
What are some of the threats that we face to our campaigning? Well, I've just mentioned apathy, and that is a big threat. And we saw that in the UK. We'll see a clip in a minute when somebody talks about the UK no longer had an active disability movement. And so they had to set up a new campaign when a threat came along. Economic domination, markets and profits will always be pushing individual human rights to one side. There is a battle across the world between the economic needs of large corporations, which is voracious, always for more profit, and the rights of people. They are not ideally matched. We haven't found a better answer to capitalism, but capitalism needs to be pulled in and controlled, which is why we need legislation so that companies just can't do what they want, and governments can't just do what they want. They have to go by human rights. So attacks on human rights, such as we've got in the UK at the moment over immigration, is not acceptable and has to be challenged in every country. And they're not the only country. Many demagogic politicians seem to be taking power, from Mr. Putin across Turkey through many other areas. We've just had some coups in Africa. These are undemocratic. Gabon has now been partially excluded from the Commonwealth because it's not an elected government. We need to stand for elected government and democracy. Without it, we will not get disability rights. Interestingly, Hitler, initially in the Third Reich, said to disabled veterans in the war, "I'm getting rid of those who are useless eaters, but you are our heroes, so we will keep you." He kept them until the last year of the war, when they were all exterminated. So don't believe demagogues. We have to have democracy and the rights of law. Lack of funding for development issues, social media. There's much unbalanced broadcasting taking place in the world through social media. The anti-vax campaign, which has no scientific basis for it whatsoever in COVID, but nevertheless, large numbers of people believe this stuff. The new populism, which seeks scapegoats, and we could easily be those scapegoats, are all reasons we need organizations to stay strong. So why start an organization? There are groups of people in every society who do not achieve all they could because of a history of being considered as inferior members of that society, because they are women, workers, indigenous people, gay or lesbian people, because of their race, religion, or culture. For hundreds of years, groups of people with something in common have come together to strengthen their sense of identity and improve their situation of the community and in their country and the world. And such is made up the real people's history of the world. And that's important that you actually know that and understand it. Disabled people have the same needs and rights as non-disabled people. They include a social life, education, food, money, dignity, respect, access to the community services, access to specialist services when we need them, forming relationships, sexuality, having a family. We've always had decisions about these things made by other people. We now have to say it's the time for us to make those decisions. And that may involve campaigning with people who haven't ever had the right to make decisions, to help them make those decisions, to give them assisted decision-making, as we are campaigning for around the world under Article 12, particularly for people with mental health issues. Increasingly in the last 50 years, disabled people all over the world have come to realize that they need to develop their skills to be all they can be. They must begin to make decisions and take control of their lives. Doing things alone doesn't always work. No one has all the answers. Being a member of a small group of disabled people, talking about experience and developing respect and support for each other is a good step towards self-respect and independence. Only when we have a strong sense of ourselves, self-confidence as a group, can we begin to do something about society's negative views. So how do we build this? Well, first of all, finding the first members, finding common cause in the place you live or the college you go to, the workplace you're in. Find people with similar exclusionary processes working against them. Find a place where you can organize and the date where people can come along. In work, that may well be after work. If there is no trade union there with no trade union rights, you will have to do it until enough of you can say, actually, we're all part of this organization and you, the boss, have to take notice of us. Working with the official trade unions is also important in a workplace. Similarly, in schools, students need to stick together and in colleges. It can be restricted, but we need to make sure that everybody's needs are met. We want deaf people on board, we need sign language. Information needs to be in an accessible format, often Braille if we don't have access to computer reading like JAWS and so on. Access problems are there and we have to deal with them. It's one of our extra things, but it's also something we have actually. They say the UNCRPD didn't create any new rights. Access is a new human right around the world under the UNCRPD, and we have to make sure we get that right in our organizations. We have to provide transport because some people can't move around as others. If we're going to an actual meeting, we need to get people there. And we need alternative media to actually get that across. So what are some of the campaigning issues that we've found out about? We've mentioned the ratification of the Commonwealth, UNCRPD, but ratifying it doesn't mean anything. It's the implementation that needs to take place. And alongside that, we've just had the halfway mark last month in New York at the UN of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And there are 11 mentions in those goals of disabled people, which is a big change because in the previous Millennium Development Goals, there were none. So that is the sign of us being organized around the world that we got those in there. However, we're only 12% there at the halfway mark. So it's unlikely that we're going to reach it, but we have to redouble our efforts, particularly in education, in hunger, in housing, in peace, to actually reach these targets, and most importantly, in the environment. And disabled people have a big vested interest in the environment, because if it works for us in the evacuation procedures, it will work for everybody. We need legislation such as we've seen in Pakistan, Canada, India, last program, South Africa. Sri Lanka is stuck. It's been stuck for 8 years in Parliament. So that needs action to move it forward, and they've had a crisis to stop that. Organising, empowering certain groups. We have our Women's Forum, our Youth Forum. Learning impaired and neurodiverse people need to come together and be supported in solidarity by the rest of us. We need economic types of benefit cuts, such as we'll see in a minute from the, we'll see now, a film of DIPAC, Disabled People Against the Cuts. When the Tory government came in 2010, following the world crisis in 2008, which was brought about by greed on the stock markets, who should pay ordinary people? There were 42 different cuts that the coalition government of 2010 introduced. And as Linda Burnett from the UK Coalition of Disabled People Against the Cuts will tell us, they had to start from scratch to build a new organisation.
DIPAC was basically set up following disabled people's protest at the Tory party conference in Birmingham in 2010. Because following on from the June 2010 budget, it was obvious that disabled people were going to be really badly impacted by the austerity cuts that George Osborne was planning to introduce. It was originally intended just to have a disabled people section in a march there, but at the same time we realised that there was no functioning national DPO to campaign against the cuts, and somehow DIPAC just sort of emerged to fill that gap. And from the original meeting of 6 or 7 co-founders in Birmingham, things just took off, and it was really difficult to know what to focus on because frankly there were so many cuts that disabled people were facing at that time. I think we've achieved quite a lot, particularly given how small we are, say, compared to one of the major disability charities. We don't have the massive amounts of funding. We don't have the massive numbers of staff. We do have a research team, which is very useful. We work very closely with John from Disability News Service, which is also very useful. And I think we've had a lot of success. I think initially, when we targeted at us, we brought down their share prices and targeted their recruitment campaigns, including on university campuses. And we basically forced them to give up the work capability assessments contracts. We targeted Ian Duncan Smith and we helped unseat Esther McVeigh in a Wirral seat. Because she really wasn't a particularly helpful minister, and she was particularly nasty. I think we were responsible for bringing the UN to the UK to carry out the first inquiry into any country using the optional protocol in the UN CRPD. We've raised awareness of the attacks and cuts that disabled people face on their lives, both through lobbying, campaigning, and I think in particular through direct actions, which I find are particularly empowering for people who may normally not have a lot of say over their lives. We've stormed Parliament twice. We attempted to occupy the grounds of Westminster Abbey. Looking at the pictures, I still can't believe how many police were involved in stopping a few disabled people camping there, but apparently it belonged to the Queen, so we couldn't go there. I think we've worked successfully with all sorts of groups. And I mean, in the last couple of months, we've actually been inundated with emails from people wanting to work with us and do joint work. And we've also worked really hard to educate non-disabled groups that we work with on meeting access needs, being inclusive, and sort of on our issues, and got them to include things that affect disabled people in a lot of their campaigning.
Well, thank you, Linda. That really shows us what you can do starting from very little. And that was really important, using the internet to bring people together. But it was the direct action that was the key thing, direct action at all sorts of offices, including the people hired to do the cuts, who in the end gave up the contract. It had real impact. Independent living, Article 19, is one of our great issues. And many people, particularly in the better off world, are segregated in institutions. Across Europe, there's still 1 million people in institutions, disabled people. And in many parts of the world, disabled children are in orphanages rather than living in the community. We need campaigns for self-determination. We need closing down of these institutions. The European Network of Independent Living has been fighting on that for a long time. Joshua Malinga, who was one of the founders of DPI, led occupation in the home he was placed in when he had polio in Bulawayo in Zimbabwe, outside the Commonwealth now. And that led to the beginning of the disability movement in Southern Africa in the 1970s. UPIAS, which came out of the protest of inhabitants at a Leonard Cheshire home in England, led to the Union of Physically Impaired Against Segregation, and it was they who designed the social model, first of all. The inclusive education is a big issue for people around the world, and we are not getting there. There is still, the norm is segregated provision for disabled students, as is reported by the UN committee. And so we need campaigns such as the one that has been led by Michelin Mason, I was part of that as well, to get an alliance for inclusive education. So over to you, Michelin.
It was set up here in the United Kingdom because there was a group of parents, as there probably is around the world, who saw themselves as allies to their children, who wanted their children to have a good life. They didn't want their children to live an institutional life. It was a gut feeling. They wanted them to be part of community. They wanted to be loved, appreciated, have friends, and so on. They just felt that. And that seemed like a very human feeling. It coincided here with change of legislation, which allowed parents to get support for their children in the mainstream school rather than the special school. But they struggled to make this happen, to make it work, because they didn't really all have the arguments. It also happened that I, myself, having a long history of disability equality training, became a parent of a disabled child and went to this parents for support myself. And it was an amazing meeting because we realized there were two groups of people, parents and disabled adults who had been segregated as young people and knew it was wrong, fighting with the same thing without knowing it. And we suddenly joined together and we discovered a few very radical progressive teachers and professionals as well. We had a conference where we just brought them together. There were lots of tears, lots of tissues, lots of solidarity, amazing sort of formation of some movement, really. And that was the beginning of our organisation, the Alliance for Inclusive Education. We knew it had to go on. We knew this alliance was extremely powerful, more so than any of the groups separately, and that we had the same vision, and it was a vision of a better better, different world, really, an inclusive world. It wasn't about fitting disabled children into what currently existed and hoping they managed somehow or other. It was about changing it so that diversity was welcome and provided for. We set up our own training, parents and disabled people training together. Again, a very powerful joint endeavour, because there was a lot of passion about it. The parents' passion for their child, disabled people's anger at what had happened to us in the past. Nobody had ever asked us. They always see parents as the powerful people in disabled children's lives, which they are. Legally, they are powerful. Disabled adults are not powerful. I was both. That was an unusual bridge between the two things, and was able to bring people together. But I'm sure that alliance could happen everywhere, because it's about what world you want for your child to become an adult in. You know, what is it? What would it look like? We started as a voluntary organisation. We had no funding. It started on my kitchen table, and then it went to a cafe. We could put all the tables together. We eventually got a very small amount of funding. We could do a letterhead and a constitution, and we decided to constitute it as a disabled people's organisation, so that we were always 1% more, 51%, so that it never got taken away from being our issue, a human rights issue. But all the parents agreed to it, they understood it. They thought that was their child growing up. That was the world they wanted, with their child having rights and having a voice of their own. So that was never a problem. Yeah. And it did work, I have to say. Many children were pioneers of inclusion.
So that's a very important campaign, and it's a model really for all around the world. We need allies for inclusive education to work. We need parents who are really the first people who look after their disabled children. Often they need to have their mind changed to see the rights of their child, to become allies for their child. We need to campaign for teachers to use their very many skills to adapt them to include all children in the classroom. We need governments to change their rigid grading and assessment procedures so all children can make progress at the level that they can. And we need children, disabled and non-disabled, to understand each other's history and to support each other, and to no longer bully each other, but actually value each other. So that's what an alliance can do, and you can do it in every country. We need to challenge portrayal in the media. Article 8 tells us about challenging awareness. We've had a number of campaigns that you can see on the website of the UK Disability History Month, the 1 in 8 campaign, a number of others, to actually get mainstream program makers to change the content of their program. Focus on soaps to make sure positive portrayal of disabled people, just ordinary, part of life. Access campaigns such as copyright on items for blind people, with a huge campaign that led to the Marrakesh Treaty, which now means that those items cannot be charged for blind people, or indeed people with learning difficulties who need it in a different format than a print format. We've got the campaign of the World Federation of the Deaf for Sign Language, which is making progress across the world. It's meant to be under the UN Convention, accepted by everybody, but we need that campaign to do that. We need to get transport accessible, and there are many campaigns around the world where people have done this. We need subsidy with vehicles, whether they be trikes, bicycles, electric bikes, electric wheelchairs, or electric cars. We need support and subsidy for mobility impaired people to have that from their governments. We need places to meet each other and learn and develop our solidarity, such as the deaf clubs which kept going sign language over a very dark period of 100 years where everybody was against sign language. We need recreation, and we need some new tools. And this is the last clip. I'm asking Micheline again to tell us about the thinking of the disability movement and how it led to us actually being the teachers, teaching the professionals with disability equality training. And don't sell yourself short. We have experience, and we can charge as DPOs for giving this experience to professionals all across the world. Micheline.
We know best what we need, that we have impairments which could be difficult, but they don't have to disable us if the conditions in which we live are right, and that we can teach you. Disabled people can teach you what we need.
There are many other forms of organisation that we could take. Disabled parents need to organise each other. Disability and relationships and sex education, speaking up together, challenging bullying, providing the wider society with disabled people who are active members as good role models, developing a disability arts and drama movement, which has developed in a number of places to actually show what we can do, working with the International Labour Organization, who've got good guidelines for trade unions about reasonable accommodations and removing barriers in the workplace and challenging employment practice. So there are many little areas that we can campaign around. There's no shortage of places to campaign. Indeed, it's about where we go. Remember, in all of this, we now have the armor of the UNCRPD, the purpose of the convention to promote, protect, and ensure the full and equal enjoyment of all human rights and fundamental freedoms by all persons with disabilities, and to promote respect and inherent dignity. That's a really important statement. And the 8 principles: respect for that dignity, autonomy, non-discrimination, full and effective participation and inclusion, respect for difference and acceptance of persons with disabilities as part of the diversity of humanity, equal opportunity, accessibility, equality between men and women, respect for the evolving capacities of children. And these 8 principles come into force in every country from the moment that they ratify the convention. So in 56 of your countries, these are issues that should be in place and you can campaign around. So the UNCRPD is really important that you familiarize yourself with it. Also, Article 4.3 and 33.3, which say they must involve civil society organizations, and particularly those with persons with disabilities, including their representative organizations. So we have have ran a campaign there for funding, and we heard in 1 or 2 of the clips there that they could get funding for these by their campaigning. In others, we still have to campaign for it. So to wind up, what have we learned from this session? Well, I would recommend, if you have television and cable and you can get to Netflix, have a look at Sex Education, Series 4. Program 7 is a good 5-minute example there of a college where they all found common cause with 4 disabled students there. The rest were non-disabled students, all sat down until the lift was fixed and access was sorted out. So there are plenty of models around, and let's not forget the sit-in of the Deaf University in Washington, where they wouldn't appoint a deaf principal and the students occupied it. So there's a long history of this to do. So in conclusion, if you have not challenged the way you are treated, do so. If you have done it on your own, join up with other disabled people. If you are not in an organization committed to struggling for change, join one. If you are in an organization, put yourself forward to lead in new aspects. Stand for election for office. Find new ways to influence everybody in your community to bring about disabled people's human rights. Don't just read about it, do it. Thank you very much.